Okay, in this exercise, I'm going to walk you through how to install Google Earth and to use Google's basic mapping platform as an entry point into geospatial analysis. This is something that you can use and feature in a blog post next week. At this stage, I would just ask that you follow along and see how far you can get. If you have questions, feel free to ask me. Um, so in order to install Google Earth, I'm doing a brand new install on my MacBook Pro, which is new to me, so we'll see how this goes. But you're just going to go to the Google Earth website, and it's going to be the option here to download Google Earth. It should detect whether you're using Mac or Windows, and you'll see that it's downloading here, going pretty quickly, and it's already ready to go. So I'm going to just click on the file here that shows up in my downloads folder. If you can't find the file, then you're going to have to find out where your browser usually leaves downloaded files and go and install it from there. So you'll see the Mac then opens up this installer package, which I will click and open. And my apologies if you're on an older OS X or if you're on a Windows machine, you're going to have to follow a fairly similar process on that. All right, so this installation seems to be going pretty well so far. Let's hope it continues. Now, Google Earth has been, for a long time now, a very successful mapping platform. Unfortunately, it's not really web-based in the sense that you can upload and save some of your own data to the web. All right, I'm just going to get rid of this and clean up my space. And I'm just going to do a spotlight search for Google Earth. And I'm going to go open this up. Or if you went down to your taskbar, you might see it. I do not, so you'd have to go into Applications and search for it there. Okay, so I've installed Google Earth. We're going to attempt to open the file. So here it is starting up for the first time in my Mac. Seems to be working pretty well so far. I'm going to turn off the tips, although there's lots of good stuff in there if you want to give it a try. Leave it on. Okay, so the Google Earth platform is basically a very user-friendly form of GIS. It's very restricted. It really limits what you can do and what you can't do, but compared to just a few years ago, it really expands your opportunities for map making. So you can see that it has a bunch of tours that are sort of already pre-existing. We're going to turn those off and not explore tours right now, but they're loads of fun if you want to follow those around, taking you sort of flight or a flyby through famous places on Earth, and with all kinds of photos and other media to view along the way. So let's just double click on any location like that, and it's going to zoom you into a certain predetermined extent. And so we'll head down here to Arizona, where I am currently located. Again, another double click is going to take you in roughly the same distance. So now that we're here, just we'll explore really quickly what we're seeing. You're already seeing things that look quite a bit different from Google Maps. Here in Google Earth, you're going to, on the right-hand side, see places and then layers. You don't see that in Google Maps. And then the layers are a whole sort of range of different kinds of data that are being displayed in GIS, or using this GIS. And like all GISs, you can turn the layers on and off and see more or less data depending on what kind of map you want to see. So that's the layers, and just as an example, we'll turn off those photos and you'll see all those geolocated photos disappear. If you turn them back on, you can click on any one of them and get a quick preview. who knows what we're going to see in some of these. Tonto and Roosevelt Lake. That's cool. Very nice. You know, lots of videos or photos you can see of that. Okay, so we'll close that. That's a great way to query some of the data that are available there. And I'm going to turn these photos off. Let's look a little bit at map exploration. So map exploration and navigation. I'm just going to bring you up here. So you can see that we're already on slight tilt. We're not exactly seeing things with a direct northward, which is the normal orientation. But if you double click on the N at the top of your compass here, you're going to see that occur. So remember, we were double clicking to zoom in, and I believe you can right click to sort of zoom out the same amount of distance. But going back into Arizona, double click like this, brings us in predetermined distance. You can already see we've gone a little bit off of the north orientation already. So if you double click on it, it will orientate you north. So many ways we can navigate using these controllers here, but this is basically a manual way to zoom in and out in the map. This is a way to pan back and forth, and then this is a way to rotate your map to get off of the north-facing orientation. Okay, but if you're using your mouse, there are all kinds of ways you can do this as well. So double click, we've already gone over, both left and right button. If you use your rollerball, you can of course zoom in and out just the way you would in Google Maps. So that's a pretty common way to get around. Okay, so those are the basic map navigation tools. And the other ones that are a little more advanced are giving you a 3D tilt over the Earth. Now, one of the ways I usually do that is by using your mouse button, your mouse roller button. So if you can see your mouse roller, for those of you who might not know, is often also a button. So if you push that in, you can see that the cursor changes to this crosshairs. And it's got an up and down arrow within it. So if you then pull your mouse down, you can see it gives you the 3D tilt of the Earth, view of the Earth. And if you let go of the mouse button, that crosshairs disappears. And as you zoom in, you stay on that same angle. You just zoom into the center point of the map, like so. And of course, there's lots of, if you hover, wherever you're hovering the mouse at any given point in time is where you zoom into. So I'm going to hover over here. I'm going to click in the mouse button again and then slide it down for a lower proximity or elevation to the Earth. So, so we are seeing at this point 3D elevation in the terrain. You don't really see it quite as well until you zoom in even closer. But one thing you can do is go to your preferences, which in a Mac or under Google Earth, and then preferences. And you can change the 3D imagery here to turn it off, or you can also, in this case, turn on high quality terrain. So this is going to, in mine, use up a lot more bandwidth for my internet caching, but as the closer you get in, you can see that it's got quite a good level of resolution, depending on where you are. And of course, it all depends on how much data are available to you. So here we are at the street level, and then it actually has this ground level view, which in this case really just kind of plops you onto the aerial imagery, and here's where you can see the 3D terrain popping up. Now, of course, if there's Street View, that gives you an extra, Street View and 3D View give you extra features in Google Earth, or extra sort of viewing options in Google Earth. But here in the desert, in Arizona, we're not going to see those. So click this to exit the ground level view, and somewhere we might see a lot more kind of striking 3D imagery is, of course, the Grand Canyon. So Grand Canyon National Park, I've just entered. This is the other way you can navigate around, and it's one of the powerful features of Google Earth is that you can navigate around by typing into the search bar. Okay, and so now that we're sort of hovering over Grand Canyon National Park here, when you do the same kind of 3D drop down, you can really see some of the striking features, 3D features on the landscape. So many of you, I'm sure, have done this before. And you can also enter ground view for whatever reason you would want to here. That just kind of simulates what it would be like standing on the ground in this location. And all of the same navigation tools still work. So you want to make sure you're facing directly north. You can click on the N, double click, and so forth. So exit ground level view to zoom out. And you can zoom way out and see the larger scale what we're looking at. So Grand Canyon National Park, in this case, becomes a search result item. So there's a few different ways that you can kind of save your search results and turn them into new layers on your table of contents or on the area where you store things here. So one way you can do that is by clicking on this. It gives you a little bit more information. But then if you right-click on an item like this and say Save to My Places, it's going to, or it should, I'm sorry, it did not add it the way I thought it would. Let me figure out how this is supposed to work. Okay, so, well, it looks like I'm going to have, one way you can do it is to copy the current search results to My Places. I'm not sure why right-clicking on it didn't work, but anyway, so there you go. The Grand Canyon National Park is now a new tab, and it's actually created two markers that are doubled here. And if we X off the search results, you'll see that one of them disappears, and now I've just got the Grand Canyon National Park that's saved in My Places. So, all right, so that's how you save some search result into your places. And then, of course, you can make new search results. And so say you're going to mark a favorite look-off point. One thing you can do is add a new place mark. Okay, so when you click on Add a Place Mark, it basically locates it right in the center of the screen and saves it at the current view that you're using right now. So I'm going to say over here, right on the ledge, is one of my favorite places. I'm going to call it My Favorite, using Canadian spelling, no N, My Favorite View. And you see it's got a latitude and a longitude point, and it gives, if you look under altitude, it's actually giving 0 meters, which means clamped to the ground. But you can change that so that it's higher or lower. Okay, you can also change the style and the color of the marker, and you can change the location of the view, or you can reset it to the current view. Okay, so these are different ways to make a marker and change it, and I'll let you experiment with all these things. You can also add an image, which is kind of nice, and a hot link. So this lets you link, if you've got a website devoted to this, if you wanted to link to your blog, that's a perfect way to do it. And you could add images that you've taken here that say if you had a photo from that location, it would be a good spot to add it. Now, remember, I'm going to click OK. And you'll see that My Favorite View is now added to My Places. Remember that when you add this content, it's not uploading it to the web, it's saving it locally on your drive on Google Earth. Okay, so this is a real whirlwind tour, but you can see that My Favorite View is still pinned in that location on the ground. And if you double click on it, it actually takes it back to where we were, because the View section of that tab was set using the current settings that we were at that point in time when we saved the view. So if we zoom in a little bit, just using the double click to zoom over there, and then I'll use the rollerball to zoom in a bit more. And now we look at the properties of this view. So get info on the Mac, the properties for My Favorite View. We can change the view to snapshot the current view. So if you say that, it's going to change both the latitude, the longitude, and the tilt that we're currently at. And then when we zoom out, double click on your icon, it automatically zooms back in. Okay, so those are the real basics of sort of navigating and adding basic content to Google Earth. Okay, so at this point I wanted to show you more about the layers. So what you can do is you can adjust this, you can see a little bit more. It's going to reduce what you see above here. You know, all these things are sort of adjustable. And what we're going to do is search the layers. Oops. We're going to search the layers here for historical content. Okay, so there's often some historical content, and one of them is David Rumsey's maps, which should be online and available. Okay, so it used to be that you could add a few different kinds of historical information to Google Earth without with an internet connection. Right now, probably the best sort of historical information that they have is really just historical satellite imagery. So they do allow you to do a kind of a time slider using this button here, Show Historical Imagery. So if you click it on, and then you can see in this particular location we've got imagery as far back as 1992 and 2014. So if we slide it back, we're going to see looks like a black and white image from black and white, but it could just be could be the kind of chromograph data point. Okay, so you can choose various levels in there, and that actually exists now for Google Street View as well. So this isn't 1992 in this case. I've seen there are some parts of the world that have as far back as the 1940s and 50s, but for the most part, that's not all that helpful for some of our place histories and other research projects that we're doing. However, it is possible to bring in historical data and pin it to this particular map, and that can be done in multiple ways. So next week we'll explore in more detail how to do this in more advanced forms, but here we're going to look at some really simple possibilities. If you, it used to be that, as I said, you could add historical layers from the David Rumsey website, and that would have happened through, where was it? Gallery. And here's a whole range of really interesting layers that you can add to your temporary places or to your places, but you would bring it in from these web-enabled places. So here it used to be that you could add Map Finder, and it would add a whole bunch of David Rumsey's historical maps, but unfortunately it's not working right now. It looks like it's been disconnected from Google Earth. One of the problems, of course, with working with this kind of a platform. So what we're going to do is we're going to toggle over to the Google Earth David Rumsey website, and the link to it is in our week 3, but this is davidrumsey.com. And you can, of course, take a long look around this website. It's got a lot of maps that are just viewable through various zooming tools, but it's got some maps as well that can be incorporated into an actual GIS. And in this case, we're going to bring some into Google Earth. So if you click on Google Earth in the David Rumsey section, it's going to bring you into a tool that will allow us to bring in some of these maps into our Google Earth as new layers. And so you can do that here. You can look at kind of a web browser version of Google Earth. And if you've gotten this far and are really frustrated because you can't install Google Earth itself, I would encourage you to try that option. But if you've got Google Earth up and running, let's do this one, Launch Google Earth Application. So what this is going to do is download a file that we can open using our Google Earth platform. So remember, we're in a web browser right now, but we're going to download a file that will let Google Earth access some of the data available on the davidrumsey.com website. And if it all works out, we might get something that looks a little bit like this. So launch the Google Earth application. What it did was it downloaded the Rumsey Collection KMZ file. So KM is usually keyhole markup, which is an old company. Keyhole was an old company that Google Earth bought and developed. And so when you see a KML or a KMZ file, that's because these were originally keyhole markup languages or keyhole markup file types. So if we just simply click on that once, what it does is it takes us into My Places and introduces the same things that used to be available only online, but in all kinds of for all kinds of parts of the world. So what we're going to do is we're going to drill down into, these are, I guess, under New Maps. Let's see if we can minimize that. Yeah. So Map Finder should be left on. And we go into North America, and I'm going to move my screen over a little bit just so I can read some more of these titles. It's going to show quite a few options, and so these are the U.S. Midwest, the U.S. West in 1861. There used to be a great one of the Grand Canyon itself, which looked really cool. Maybe we'll go to the Yosemite Valley and add that one. But just as an example, U.S. West is going to change what we see on the screen in front of us. So when I add U.S. West, you can see that this is very white. It no longer looks like a satellite image. It looks like a really grainy close-up view of an image or a document, because that's what it is. We're seeing a very close-up image of a low-resolution document. And if you zoom out, you'll see that it's actually a historical map of the West, just like it says. And it's got a lot of detail at certain scales, but at the level that we were zoomed into, of course, it looked really grainy and not much detail at all. So we maybe move this back up, and so we can turn off some of these web layers. Let's turn off borders, and we'll turn off places, and we'll turn off, I guess we'll, turn off ocean too. So we've got everything off. And here you can see a nice view of the map that was once a two-dimensional image, and now it's been georeferenced or contorted and pinned so that it fits the contours of the Earth. Now the nice thing about this is that we can actually still go right back to our former view, because my favorite view is still available under places. So if we double click on this, it's going to zoom us back in. But what I'm going to do is stop it part way, because I don't want to go quite all the way back in like we were. I'm going to stop it here and see. So when map makers were drawing the West in 1861, or when this particular one was, anyway, these were some of the things that they were interested in. Here's Grand Canyon National Park under here. Clearly not an area that they were all that interested in enhancing. So the Coyotero Apaches, some of you in this course will have a better sense than I of what that actually is. How has that place changed now, and what's there now? So anyway, so this is one way to explore a three-dimensional historical view of the Earth. Okay, so let's turn that map off. So we're going to scroll back down. Remember, it's a layer underneath here. We're going to turn that off, and that brings us back to this satellite view of the Earth. We're seeing it in 2015, which is what we want. We're going to turn off this historical imagery, and now we're seeing the most recent. And I'm going to double click on the N again to get us back up to the north. So what you're seeing here is these maps are, these images here are showing you the sort of center point or the centroid of each one of the maps that are listed on the table of contents here. So if we click on this, we see that there's actually two, and there's a geological map available from David Rumsey, and this is a preview using the website of what's on the map. So if we were to find that on the table of contents, we might actually be able to zoom in and see the geological breakdown of how this Wheeler survey was being used, of how it was produced, and then we can see that georeferenced. And again, it's a good way to preview a lot of these maps. Here's a really detailed survey, as also by Wheeler, from the 1880s, and that looks like it would have a really nice U.S. West from 1873 to 71. Let's see if we can activate it through here. I don't see how, so we would have to find it in the West. Maybe we'll give it a try. So if we go over here and then scroll down, we can see that the Wheeler maps all appear to be underneath here. And if we make it even bigger, make our map even smaller, we see that this is the U.S. West 1871 to 83 topographical. So if we turn that on, it's loading, and it's going to allow us to zoom in. And now we can see the Grand Canyon National Park historical map is showing up. Looks in what looks to be a lot more detail. So if we scroll up, we're going to go back to my favorite view, and it's going to zoom into that place, taking us back to a place that we have identified previously as something we wanted to consider and look at. We're going to scroll out here, and now if you look around, you can see the historical map draped over the modern landscape of the Grand Canyon Valley. Now, this is kind of cool. How useful it is another question, but it is, again, a nice way to compare features on the landscape. For instance, this border, which was drawn by Wheeler's Topographical Survey. And if we turn this map off, down here under Wheeler again, we can see what was underneath that border in certain places. Okay, so the river is a little bit off by the looks of that historical map, but not necessarily a big surprise. Okay, so that's some fun in the Grand Canyon. Another thing I want to do before we finish is work on actually bringing in a historical map that has not been georeferenced or has not been fitted to the surface of the Earth just yet. Okay, so I'm going to minimize all of the Rumsey layers here. And so we can see that they're still there and they're still available, but they're turned off, so we don't see them in front of us, and they're not blocking our view. So, and zoom out just a bit so that we can see where we are. And then let's go ahead and work on a historical map that I can bring in and just do some basic georeferencing myself. So I'm going to bring in a two-dimensional map and let it fit the surface of the Earth here. Okay, so at this stage I'm going to bring in a historical map, and I'm actually going to go right to a web provider that I know has maps that I can incorporate into Google Earth, and I'll show you how I get maps like that. So I'm going to go over to my web browser and I'm going to type in this particular. Now this is similar to David Rumsey, but it is specific to Prince Edward Island. So islandimagine.ca. Okay. I've typed it in wrong. Let's try it now. There we go. So this is basically an online collection, a map repository, and I'm going to search it for a map that I know is in there somewhere called Bayfields Maps, and I'm going to find a map of Prince Edward Island. Actually, it's Richmond. Drawn by Bayfield, but specifically of Richmond Bay. So here is the map that I'm going to download. So I've clicked on it here and it's showing up quite small. Zoom in a little bit, and you can see it's refreshing and loading. Now, I happen to know that there's a way to get a larger version of this map by doing a search like this. Oh, I happen to also get things wrong from time to time, and so I'm going to have to try refreshing that again. So should be loading in here now, and actually this is a little bit too big, so I'm going to go with one level smaller. Anyway, this is a convoluted way of getting a map that I like to use and downloading it from the website. Now, this way I can add this map as a JPEG, so I'm going to save the image as Bayfield map of Richmond Bay. And I'm going to save it to my desktop and click save. And there it is. And on a Mac, I'm going to click Show in Finder. And so it's often a good idea to take a look at some of the information about the map, how big it is. This one's less than 4 megabytes, so it should be okay. So what I'm going to try and do now is bring this map into Google Earth. So I'm going to toggle back to my Google Earth. I'm going to leave the Grand Canyon behind for now. And again, we're going to use our map navigation tool to go to what's now called Malpeque Bay, Prince Edward Island, Canada. And we'll do our flying over the Earth trick. Bring us right down into this part of Prince Edward Island. Now, we are facing north. That's usually important because most maps were originally drawn facing north. Now, this is going to be much less dramatic than Google Earth's imagery because than imagery of the Grand Canyon because this part of the world is pretty flat by comparison. Okay, so we can see that it's here. I could save this as a place, but I'm not going to right now. I'm just going to close that. And then what I'm going to do here is import some imagery. Okay, so that's here. It's called Add Image Overlay. Now this is a very basic and not all that scientific. It's really just for quick displays of historical maps in modern places. But it works for now. And so what we're going to do is we're going to call this the Richmond Bay map by Captain Bayfield. 1845, I believe, was the date. And then we're going to find it on the desktop where I left it. Should hopefully still be there. And there's the JPEG, and we're going to open it. And now you can see that it sort of automatically pops in to the green border areas. And all of the regular sort of description, altitude, and location tools that we saw before are there, but we also have something new. This is because this is a raster image. So unlike other maps, like the one of the Grand Canyon that we saw before, that historical map was also a raster map. All historical imagery that you bring in is going to be in raster format. So that just means that it's data that's made of pixels on a grid. And so video's getting long, I'm sorry. But here, because it's a raster, we can change the opacity of it. So if we grab the transparency slider and slide it like this, we can actually adjust it to be whatever stage of transparency we want. You could do the same thing with the Grand Canyon maps that were historical maps brought in by David Rumsey. But here, the big difference is that now we have to do some sorting on our own, or some geolocation on our own. So the way you do that is essentially you can zoom in and out using your regular tools, but what you need to do now is grab the sort of boundaries of this map and move it like this. And you can see that, like all image manipulation, it starts to make things quite wonky. That's a technical term, wonky. And I can see that things are looking pretty close actually with just that slight bit of alteration. And I might want to make some basic changes, and I think I will. And for the purposes of this demonstration, I think that's going to be good enough. Now, it looks a little bit better here than it will when we zoom in, but I'm going to make this totally opaque, and I'll leave that open for now. What I want to do is zoom into a certain part. Now, these were hydrographic maps, so they're comprised of all kinds of depth soundings. And you can see all of these measurements, 21, 22, 23. Those are depth fathoms. And so they're really, it was meant for the purpose of making this space navigable and reporting back to the British Hydrographic Service so that it could be used for commercial and defense purposes. But one thing that's quite interesting is that when you see this large channel here, and then you make this map transparent, or if you remove it completely, you can see that there's a completely different kind of landscape there now. The map does match up. It could use more work, of course, and the more you position these maps around and rotate them, there's a rotation tool as well, and I'll show you that briefly right here. Oops. The rotation tool appears to have gone. It's right here. Okay, so this little angle lets you grab it and rotate it just a little bit. In this case, I don't really want to do that because this map was north oriented, and my Google map is supposed to be pretty well north oriented as well. So you can grab it like this and see how I'm still sliding it around. I'm using this George Island as basically a point of reference, and we're going to talk more about control points in the next exercise, which is of course much more exact. But here we're using George Island as our one control point, and then we're going to change the opacity to see that that whole end of this barrier island in Prince Edward Island has changed dramatically over the years. From 1845 to today, this, what was once a navigable passage, has now filled in almost, well, to the point where it has vegetation growing on it. And before too long, this part will build up and it will be a larger part of the island. It's interesting because a lot of Prince Edward Island environmental history is quite focused on erosion as a problem in the province. But here when we use Google Maps, we can see that in some locations, and certainly the predominant story is erosion, but in some locations what we see is a story of accretion, or the opposite of erosion. Okay, so we're going to make that map, in this case, totally opaque. And then when we zoom out, we can see that the map sits in location. When we do 3D images and zoom around, we can see that this map, which is very focused on sea and hydrographic features, is much more important than what's on the land. You see the land is blank space, and if we turn it off, we can see that, of course, there's a whole lot of land use activity going on now that wasn't happening at the time, and of course wasn't a really point of interest for people at the time. Okay, so it shows up as an image, as a layer here, the Richmond Bay map layer. And if we double click on it, it's going to take us back to the last layer that we used, the last view that we were situated at, so that it's all fitting into view. Okay, that pretty well concludes the Google Earth and historical map lesson. And is that you can save your places. You can do that by either right-clicking and save places as, which will allow you to create a new file, or you can just go to File and Save. But I'm going to save the place as, and I'm not going to save all of this junk. I'm going to just save the Richmond Bay map that I made. So I'm going to, oh, this is important. Right now it's currently under temporary places. You want to save that to My Places. See how it bumps it up and puts it underneath My Places. Now I'm going to right-click it again and Save Place As. And it's going to let us use that same KMZ file that we downloaded from the Rumsey maps. So I'm going to save this as Richmond Bay 1845, and I'm going to put it in the desktop, and it's going to save as a KMZ file. I'm going to click Save, and now if I it's going to, before you close Google Earth, it's going to warn me that that I should save these things. And there on the desktop, we are going to see, if all works out well, the Richmond Bay KMZ. So if we double click on this guy, it's going to reopen Google Earth. It's going to zoom in and probably automatically take us right back to the place that where we were storing this Richmond Bay KMZ file originally. Okay, so go ahead and experiment with Google Earth and with georeferencing in a really basic sense, historical maps that you find and bring in as image files.